What happens when arrogance collides with power, when those sworn to uphold the law forget their oath and target the innocent? You won't believe what happened when a little black girl stood her ground against corrupt cops. Her courage revealed a truth that shook the entire city to its core. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking, powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate resilience. It all began on a sweltering Friday afternoon when 12-year-old Amara Johnson, a bright and outspoken black girl with braids tied in colorful beads that clicked when she moved, walked home from school carrying her heavy backpack and clutching the latest novel she had checked out from the library, never imagining that her ordinary day would spiral into a nightmare that would shake the foundation of the police department and eventually capture national headlines, because as she passed a corner store on Maple Street, 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt and 3 uniformed officers stepped out, their sunglasses gleaming under the sun, their posture exuding that mix of arrogance and misplaced authority, and one of them barked, "Hey you, come here," in a tone that suggested accusation rather than inquiry, and though Amara hesitated, unsure why she was being called, she turned politely and said, "Yes, sir." Only for the officer to scowl and accuse her of loitering, claiming that she matched the description of someone suspected of shoplifting earlier in the day, which was absurd because Amara had just come from school and still had her ID badge and homework sticking out of her folder. But before she could even explain, the second officer stepped forward and said, "Don't get smart with us, little girl," his voice dripping with disdain, and Amara, raised to speak with confidence and dignity, replied firmly but respectfully, "I'm not getting smart, sir, I'm just telling the truth. I didn't do anything wrong," a statement that should have ended the conversation, but instead it ignited their egos, for the first officer leaned down, towering over her and sneering, "Watch your mouth, you think you can talk back to the police?" While bystanders began to gather, murmuring uncomfortably at the sight of grown men intimidating a child, yet Amara refused to cower, her heart pounding but her resolve strong, saying, "I have the right to speak, and I didn't do anything," and those words, so simple, so rooted in justice, were the spark that unleashed their cruelty, for one officer yanked the library book out of her hand, tossing it onto the pavement, while another grabbed her arm roughly, twisting it behind her back as if she were a criminal, and though the crowd gasped, some recording on their phones, the officers mocked her cries of pain, taunting, "This is what happens when kids don't know their place," and as they humiliated her further, forcing her to kneel on the hot concrete, they laughed cruelly, ignoring the woman shouting from across the street, "She's just a child. Let her go." But the officers were intoxicated with power, blind to the reality of who they were dealing with, for Amara was not just any little girl. She was the only daughter of Director Marcus Johnson, the head of the FBI, a man both feared and respected across agencies, a man who had dedicated his life to dismantling corruption, and as fate would have it, Marcus was not in Washington, D.C. that day but back home for a weekend surprise visit to his family, and he was only 2 blocks away, stepping out of a cafe with his protective detail when his phone buzzed with a frantic call from his wife, Amara's mother, who had been alerted by neighbors rushing to tell her what was happening, and the moment Marcus heard the words, "Police," Amara, on the ground, a storm of rage and disbelief surged through him, and he sprinted toward the scene with his agents, his badge already in his hand, his voice thundering as he broke through the crowd, "What the hell is going on here?" Stunning everyone, especially the officers, who turned and, not recognizing him immediately, barked back, "Sir, step aside, we're conducting an arrest," but Marcus strode forward with an authority that froze the onlookers, his face a mask of fury as he pulled his daughter gently into his arms, checking her bruised wrist, his protective instincts roaring, and then he raised his badge high, his voice booming, "I am Director Marcus Johnson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you are assaulting my daughter," the revelation slamming into the officers like a hammer, their smug expressions melting into pale shock, one stammering, "Yes, sir. We didn't know," but Marcus cut him off, his tone lethal, "You didn't need to know. She's a child. You abused your power, humiliated her, and violated every code you swore to uphold. That is all I need to know," and with a nod to his agents, the officers were swiftly disarmed and placed in cuffs themselves, the crowd erupting in cheers, some chanting Amara's name, others shouting for justice, phones capturing every second as the tide turned. But this was only the beginning, for Marcus was not a man who let corruption hide in the shadows, and as Amara clung to him, whispering, "Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong. I just told the truth," he kissed her forehead and promised, and the whole world will know it, sweetheart," setting into motion a chain of events that would expose not only the cruelty of 3 bad cops but an entire culture of misconduct within the department, because investigations quickly revealed that these same officers had dozens of complaints against them, complaints that had been buried by their superiors, and as Marcus brought federal resources to bear, city leaders scrambled, the police chief resigned, and the officers faced charges for assault, misconduct, and abuse of authority. But the most powerful twist came when Amara herself, standing on a stage at a community rally weeks later with cameras flashing and reporters hanging on her every word, lifted the very library book they had thrown on the ground and said, "This book is about courage, and courage is not the absence of fear. It is standing up when you know you're right, even when people try to silence you. I am not afraid of them anymore," her words echoing across the nation, sparking movements in schools, churches, and communities. And though the officers tried to claim they were misunderstood, the evidence and testimonies sealed their fate, and the city settled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit in Amara's name, which her parents pledged to use for scholarships for children who had been victims of injustice, turning her pain into power. Yet the story did not end there, because one of the most shocking twists emerged when Marcus discovered that the officers had been part of a secretive network within the department, linked to corrupt politicians and even a criminal syndicate, meaning Amara's bravery had unintentionally cracked open a case far larger than anyone realized, leading to indictments, arrests, and the dismantling of a ring that had thrived on intimidation for years, all because one little girl refused to be silenced, refused to let humiliation define her, and in the end, the same city streets where she had been forced to her knees became the place where she marched tall, leading thousands in a unity rally alongside her father, her voice stronger than ever as she declared, "No child should be treated like I was, but if they are, let my story remind them that the truth is always stronger than fear." And as the applause thundered, Amara smiled, knowing that what began as humiliation had transformed into triumph, her courage lighting the way for countless others, forever reminding the world that even in its smallest form, truth has the power to topple giants.